Demon in a Bottle by Mace Valor. Links to my audiobooks, Shelter and The Reset, can be found in the description down below.
Within moments, Frank's heart shifted from a frantic pounding to an unsettling stillness. It was the most agonizing state of relaxation he had ever experienced. Nearly bursting from his chest, the motionless mass ceased its prime directive. Finally, the pain of existence was over. He tried to open his eyes, but they remained shut, as if seared by an invisible, intense light. There he lay in the driver's seat, unable to move, speak, or taste. He knew his mouth was dry, but in place where he expected a coarse texture of sandpaper coating his tongue was a smooth numbness that signaled the removal of his sensation of touch. Temperature, wetness, and discernible textures all faded into a bland sense of uncertain pressures, where physical contact proved as ineffective as the eyes of the blind. "Is this what death is like?" Frank wondered, his thoughts becoming a faint echo reflecting his lost senses. "Death is painless," a voice hissed in his right ear. "It's what comes after that will make you wish to be alive again." Taken aback at the reply, Frank gave a furrowed brow, his eyes pinching tight as a stinging hit his temples. A soft static of white noise grew in his ears as his hearing returned, accompanied by the pain in his chest. Rather than respond to the materialized voice, Frank's thoughts turned to the half-empty beer bottle resting in his lap. A cool drink would quench his dried taste buds. All that would remain was getting his vision back. "Thirsty, are we?" The voice grew deeper with a slight rasp. Frank's dehydrated, cracked lips harshly leaked the words, "Why can't I see?" "Oh, Francis, trust me when I say you really don't want to see where you are right now." Then who are you?" "I am one called Barfazol, someone with too much on their agenda to elaborate into irrelevant details. And before you ask, yes, you are indeed dead. At least you should be." These cryptic words begged more questions than answers. "What? Then how can I—" Barfazol grunted before interrupting. "Please save any quandaries for your manifestation. We don't have the time. All that matters is that we reach a bargain, here and now, no matter how inconvenient it may be in your current state." "A deal?" The white noise turned to an inharmonious, howling wind. "What is it? Would you like to sell your soul?" "Sell my soul? What is this, some Bloody Mary shit?" "Oh, Francis, let's not start this transaction off on an insulting foot." Barfazol made several audible clicks. "I will temporarily save you from utter damnation, and, in exchange, all I ask for is 10,000 souls." Frank's hand clutched his thumping chest. "How do you expect me to agree to anything if I can't even see you?" With a wide smile and a flick of slender fingers, Barfazol gave a snap. "Remember, I warned you." All of Frank's senses returned in a flash, restoring the grim facets of reality in all their mundane absurdity. The acrid stench from the car seats tingled his nose as the pressure splitting his skull mounted. He was alive, for better or worse. After experiencing the sensational absence that accompanied death, Frank established a newfound appreciation for living, even if it was just added misery. Of course, his gratefulness only lasted until his vision returned an uninviting, narrow focus. Beyond the grimy dust and debris littering the cracked windshield was a vast gray shoreline. Frank's eyes narrowed against the relentless onslaught of fog, a sinister pale vapor that transformed the landscape into an uncharted realm foreign to his imagination. He was sure of one thing. The desolate back-country road, he remembered, was nowhere to be found. The car sat on a hill near a dark sea that faded away as the fog concealed the horizon. The deep blues of the water formed a salty foam as each wave crest broke just before beating the sand. Dark figures raced along the beach, chasing a long, tattered banner without ever reaching it. The waves crashed where the sea met the land, pushing several figures down as they strayed too close, an assurance that their tiresome labor would be ever more. Unable to take his eyes off the foolish masquerade, Frank muttered, "If I'm dead, then where did I go?" "Well, perhaps I have time to elaborate on that sticky part of your situation." Balthazar gave 3 raspy clicks as he claimed a cigar from Frank's glove box. "Beyond the confines of this vessel awaits an unpleasant underworld called home to billions of lost souls." Frank turned his head slowly, his gaze ensnared by the malevolent gold of Balthazar's eyes, orbs rich with cunning. The elderly man, with years etched into his visage, held a grin tinged by the pallor of decay, bore teeth stained a sallow yellow, each sharpened to form jagged, uneven points. His ashen complexion was almost translucent, as dark veins marred the surface of his skin, reminiscent of a spider's intricate web traveling up his neck. Most out of place was the lightly colored robe he wore that draped on the passenger seat, spilling over the center console. Frank remained silent and motionless as Balthazar lit the cigar and filled the car with a thick haze. "You may be familiar with the term hell, but this place can be so much more if you allow it. So that is my proposal for you. 10,000 souls and yours shall walk away free to face judgment at a later date. Either that, or you join those in limbo waiting to pay the ferryman." Another deep exhale gave enough smoke to make the windshield obscured. "Oh, and he does take his time. So many souls to carry across that it might take you several lifetimes of chasing the banner before your ticket is called. The skin of your feet will blister and peel as you sprint across endless miles of sand, eroding away until there is nothing left but bone and tendons. All the while, your pain never grows a tolerance. Food for thought." The entire grisly situation Frank found himself in reached a level of absurdity that was beyond comprehension, save for the needling pain in his chest, amplifying with each miserable moment. The pain was real, that much was certain. It was as if, with every breath he took, Frank was reliving his death all over again. A violent pounding of his chest accompanied by shallow, labored gulps of air that did nothing to stop the stabbing sensation piercing the core of his chest. Every muscle, every ounce of strength in his body could not combat the overwhelming force of his heart's final beats. He wanted nothing more than for this experience to end. Could this pain be a mere paper cut when compared to what awaited him on the grey shore? The only other option was to agree to a deal Frank knew little about, while the fine details lay hidden behind a hideous smile of knives. Of any certainty that might manifest in Frank's mind, he found one solitary truth remained evident. He was damned either way. One deep inhale of the now dense, smoke-filled air, Frank reluctantly pronounced his decision. "Fine. Sure. Deal." His hand clutched tight to his chest as he winced out the words in heavy dismay. Whatever to make this feeling go away. As he spoke the words, his chest experienced a stinging spasm of tightening muscles. Immediately after, he took a deep inhale of bitter, burned air, filling his lungs as if he had just broken the surface of water that had held him under for so long. Although the physical sensation of death was no longer present, the memory lingered as Frank fought to catch his breath. "Wonderful." Balthazar unleashed a rusty chuckle as he patted his bony fingers on Frank's shoulder. The motion was as unwelcoming as it was discomforting, though the friendly intention of the moment was understood. Hunched over the steering wheel, Frank gave a worried glance to Balthazar. "So what now? Right? Straight to business, of course." Balthazar reached a slender hand into the left sleeve of his robe, revealing a rolled, stained parchment. "Both parties must sign an agreement to the bargain. along with a witness, of course. It is necessary to properly account for these types of deals. After all, saving your soul comes with risk, and I'd rather not leave my investment up to trusting you to your word. We all know what that is worth, Francis." Insulted by the jab at his character, Frank knew it to be true and gritted his teeth, biting his lower lip in the process rather than instigate an argument. The tightly wound parchment unrolled swiftly, the curled paper filling most of the front half of the car. Faded dark ink seemed to scroll endlessly, covering every available surface. Barfazol hastily made his way to the bottom, where 3 lines lay ready to receive their signatures. He motioned the page to Frank, ready to have him sign his soul away. "Do you have a pen?" Frank asked, as he raised a brow of apprehension to the line requiring his signature. Barfazol returned yet another skin-crawling smile. He placed a thumb and finger taut to a sharp fingernail, pulling it out of his skin. Sprouting from the base of the nail was a long metal spike, stretching out far past where his finger met the palm of his hand. A viscous, black liquid oozed as the blade wrenched itself out of the pale, wrinkled skin. When the point finally revealed itself, Barfazol clenched the blade in one hand and took Frank's hand with the other, the tar-like ooze still seeping from the open wound. "Try not to make any sudden movements," Barfazol's voice turned stern. "Besides, you've already experienced more intense pain than what lies ahead." Before Frank could process any form of protest, Barfazol shoved the blade deep into the center of Frank's left palm. The pain may not have been worse than his heart continuously stopping, but nonetheless still made him jolt in agonizing surprise from the abrupt motion. The metal spike was pushed down to the cracked fingernail at its base, but did not penetrate out the opposite end of his hand. Frank's palm became cold, freezing in fact, so much so that the chill turned to a burning sensation like holding fiery coals. When Barfazol pulled the blade out of Frank's hand, all that remained was a burned, 7-pointed star-shaped scar, cool to the touch, but otherwise painless. "Your quill, Francis." Barfazol handed the spike to Frank, now lined red with his blood, and as pure the time-honored tradition of these things, the ink. Frank wrote his name on the scroll without hesitation on top of the line labeled client. He wanted nothing more than to be done with this as soon as possible. He didn't take a second to read any of the fine cursive strewn across the parchment. What was the point? Die now or die later, the timing would always be inconvenient. Signing his soul away would at the very least grant him another day away from the torment set before him in the afterlife. He laid his head back on his seat, his thumb pressing against the fresh scar in his hand. "Are we done yet?" His eyes closed. Frank let out an exhausted gasp. Barfazol carefully scrawled his signature along the line that read, "Broker." "And that just leaves our witness." He snapped his fingers, then pressed them to his chapped lips, letting out an eardrum, shattering whistle, then called out a name in a guttural and unrecognizable language. Frank slowly opened his eyes and looked to the passenger seat to see a small, hairless red creature leaning over Barfazol's shoulder, writing away on the scroll. It was a disgusting-looking creation, with twisted claws on its hands and arched feet. Its spine was traced with boils and bumps, tiny spines that went from its thin neck down to a long, whip-like tail, flailing to and fro. The head of the small beast was completely bald, the skin dry, cracking, discolored. Adored on its forehead were 2 bone-like horns, each protruding from its skull, uneven in placement and size. This grotesque little beast signed bloody scratches and scrapes over and around the line, labeled witness. Barfazol joyously belted more of his random clicks as the ugly red imp jumped to the back of the car. He shook his head as he carefully rolled the parchment, taking his time to ensure the edges were neatly aligned before stowing it back up his sleeve. "Oh, Francis, Francis, Francis," Barfazol presented that frail, unsettling hand to Frank. "This has most certainly been a pleasure, doing business with you, that is." Despite feeling extreme discomfort at the mere thought of touching the unsettling old man, Frank believed it would be impolite to refuse Barfazol's offer for a handshake. The feeling of the long, skin-covered, bony fingers felt worse than the thought of it. With that distressing shake of their hands, the bargain was struck, and the deal was settled. "Now let me tell you, Francis," Barfazol held a firm grip to Frank's hand as he leaned in close with the stench of brimstone emanating from his hot breath. "You cannot properly prepare for the new world that awaits you outside this vessel. Be thankful there is more time before you face final judgment." "Oh, and of course," his face became heavy, ridged to help convey his seriousness, "keep to your end of the arrangement. I wouldn't want to chase after payment. There are so many souls worth having than yours." There was no mistaking the weight of those words. The only rational reason for a deal such as this to be presented was for the cost of Frank's soul to be outweighed by the souls he could offer in exchange. 10,000 souls, to be exact. Was that really the value Frank held? Either his soul was a hot commodity, or so utterly worthless that he would have to exchange an immeasurable amount. Deep in his heart, Frank knew he was worthless. Nobody found any value in him or who he was, whether they were friends, family, or strangers. He predicated his existence on his own selfish indulgences. No one meant a damn thing to him outside of his own toxic vices. His unhealthy, immoral obsessions carried him from one day to the next, sealing his soul's fate years before this destined overdose brought him before the broker. A deep inhale and a heavy sigh were all Frank gave to Barfazol to confirm he understood everything he was saying. Their eyes transfixed on one another. Frank had failed to notice Barfazol raising the spike, the bloody ink now dry and flaking. With a forceful punch to his chest, Frank looked down to see the spike buried into his heart. An intense beating of his heart, as if kicks started by the blade, set a steady, rapid beating. From head to toe, a vigorous feeling infused him, as though he could conquer mountains. A strength coursing throughout his body as the fingernail hilt stuck out of his chest. The fog outside the car's windows lifted as the morning sunshine broke through the glass, revealing the endless country road winding before him, as he last recalled, before submitting to the initial heart attack. The amber glow of the morning sunshine expunged the grey shoreline, scattering light through the trees on the side of the road. That nightmarish hellscape with the old man was gone. Or was it ever really there? With sweaty hands, Frank patted his body down to ensure he was still alive. Had it just been a maddening concoction his mind crafted while his body succumbed to an overdose of liquor and pills? He knew one truth to be evident. He was both physically and mentally exasperated. Resting his forehead on the steering wheel, hands running fingers through sandy blonde hair, he tried to calm himself, afraid that his fever dream was a reality he'd chosen not to acknowledge. The car moved slightly as a faint scratching came against the old suede seats. From the back seat to the passenger, something had moved, slowly, quietly, closer to rest still next to Frank. Rotating his forehead across the steering wheel, he looked over to the seat next to him, then let out a cry of terror. Sitting across from Frank was the tiny red demon that signed as his witness. Frantically attempting to escape from the car's confined space, Frank made a wild, desperate pull of the driver's door handle. After several futile attempts, he realized the door was locked. Without looking back towards the awful-looking imp, he unlatched the lock and pushed the door open. As the driver's door flung open, Frank fell to the ground, along with the sound of empty beer bottles hitting the pavement. Frank clawed against the road, trying to push himself up as his feet slid across loose gravel. Once he thrust himself upright, he started a mad dash to the wood line, leaving as much distance as possible between himself and the car. Without intending to, he gave a cautionary glance back to the road to ensure he wasn't being followed. Panic set in as the puny red creature was chasing after him. It snarled through a lipless sneer while its limbs flailed about like a feral beast. Frank couldn't tell if the creature was real or just a hallucinatory manifestation. Either way, the very idea of something so abominable was enough to fill him with both disgust and fear. Better to keep his attention ahead of himself than dread whatever machination was summoned by a poor cocktail of alcohol and opioids. It didn't take long for Frank to make his way through the sparse tree line along he rode. He was now hitting a dead sprint through a clearing. Most surprising was a house not too much further ahead. Perhaps there was someone inside that could provide a momentary shelter while he sobered up. Scrambling up the steps of the plantation-style porch, Frank met the front door of the house with clenched fists. "Hello?" Pounding hard on the door, he shouted for any occupants to come to his rescue. "Please, anyone! Help! There's something out here!" Without ceasing a moment to hear a reply, Frank tried turning the doorknob. Locked. He rushed to the nearest window, slapping the glass haphazardly as he continued to plead for help. Just like the beast that gave chase to him, Frank pounced along the porch, striking the house like an animal. His flight or fight response had hit a peak of unmitigated desperation. Looking around, he couldn't find his would-be assailant, but that didn't mean he was in the clear just yet. Hoping to enter the home, Frank darted around the left side of the wraparound porch. Just as he turned the corner, a blunt force met him, knocking him off his feet and landing him with a thud on the solid wooden floor. His vision became blurry, the adrenaline of being hunted wearing off. Heavy breathing became shallow, the frenzied rush of blood pumped by his heart's frantic beating slowed. That thing... Frank's eyes were closed from exhaustion. He muttered to a fuzzy figure standing over him. "It's coming for me." The fog that muddled Frank's head dissipated as his heavy eyelids gently opened. He placed a hand against the throbbing sore on the side of his skull. The pain was somewhere between a headache and a concussion, although it was most likely a mix of the two. He was inside the house with the ceiling above him and the soft comfort of a couch below. Of all the things he felt, one thought predominated. He could really go for a drink right about now. Welcome back to the land of the living. A well-dressed, silver-haired man placed a glass of water on the coffee table with an unsure smile. "Think you can sit up, or do you need to rest longer?" Frank used the leverage of an elbow to lean over and grab the glass. "I think I can manage." He gave a bitter grimace, following a healthy gulp of water. "Any chance you have anything stronger than this?" The man shrugged his shoulders and put his hands on his hips. "Not sure that's a good idea, given your current state. Sorry for the, well, you know." He motioned to the side of his head. "But after all the banging on my door and windows, I think we can call it even." "Yeah, that." Frank reluctantly finished his water. "Sorry. Obviously, I was a bit out of my mind. I swear I was being chased by... something." As Frank lazily positioned himself upright, he noticed a thick syringe laying on the table. "That was sticking out of your chest when I found you. Did someone strike you with it?" "The only person who stuck me with anything was Barfazol," Frank thought to himself, astonished that he recalled the name of the entity his plastered mind conceived. "No. As far as I remember, I've been alone." He didn't desire to go into detail, but Frank knew he owed some kind of explanation. Might have taken the source a bit far this time. Taking a seat on the coffee table, the man bent towards Frank, His hands collapsed together, fingers interlaced. To be blunt, you're one lucky guy. That shot of adrenaline straight to your heart kept you from dying. I don't know what you took, but whatever it was, you should be dead. That, and of all places to wind up in this part of the county, you came to my doorstep. Be thankful someone or something was looking out for you. I'm sure the big guy upstairs has a soft spot for me. Frank gave a sarcastic chuckle, then raised a brow. And this might sound rude, but I don't know how else to phrase it. What makes you so special? I'm a doctor, Francis, the guy said, surprising Frank with his knowledge of his name. Then Frank noticed his wallet sitting on the table. Specifically, I'm a veterinarian with a specialization in equestrians. There's enough overlap that I'm confident in treating minor issues with people, apart from that bump on your head and fatigue from the adrenaline wearing off. You should be just fine. What worries me, however, he grabbed Frank's left hand, holding the palm up, is this a recent scar? It shows all the telltale markings of frostbite. A gasp of shock sent a chill down Frank's spine. The 7-pointed star remained from being stabbed by Bafazol. Thinking the entire ordeal was a cruel manifestation brought forth by a drunken stupor was one thing, yet having another person confirm physical proof of such an event was another. This both calmed and frightened him. At least he wasn't crazy. If the scar is real, Frank's imagination raced, then what about the creature? Not long after the thought came to mind, Frank heard a light tapping by the door. Huddled behind a bushy fern in a pot, he could see the same creature that chased him out of his car. Its pointy claws scraped along the brim of the pot, while its tail whipped along the marble tile covering the floor. Bright yellow eyes stared straight at his own through the leaves. "It's in here!" Frank quickly tried jumping over the couch, but stumbled and fell to the floor, his body still sore and weak. The doctor jogged over to help Frank on his feet. "Calm down, Francis. You're safe. Nothing is going to hurt you." "Open your eyes, man." Frank pushed away the doctor's helping hand in refusal. "That fucking thing is right over there. By the door. Behind the pot." Confused, he walked over to the pot while maintaining eye contact with Frank. "Here?" Frank's eyes widened in disbelief as he witnessed the man sliding the pot. He was mere inches away from the tiny imp and its guttural snarl, but hadn't seemed to notice its presence at all. Frank drew in heavy breaths to calm himself as the imp scampered away from the doctor and found refuge peering out from under the curtains that draped the window. A gasp escaped Frank's lips as he realized he was the only one who could see the astonishing, grisly scamp. "On second thought," the man began, walking to the kitchen, "let's get you that drink." The very idea of a stiff drink was enough to put Frank at ease, if only for a moment. His patience was wearing thin, his palms became clammy, and while he waited for the doctor to deliver his medicine, he kept his attention on the creature staring back at him. All it did was look at Frank as it remained hidden the best it could. The longer he looked, the more Frank felt maybe it wasn't as harmful as it appeared. Trembling uncontrollably, its misshapen horns dripped with tiny droplets of sweat that trickled down to its upturned, pointed nostril. It looked as terrified as Frank felt. "Here's a nice cold microbrew," the man returned with a beer bottle in one hand and a small paper cup in the other. "And something to help ease your nerves." Frank drew his watchful eyes away from the red menace long enough to receive the beer and cup from his overly gracious host. "I'm sorry. I didn't catch your name." "That's because I didn't give it." He let out a sigh before walking to the window, poking through the curtain. "You said you're alone? Anyone expecting you?" As odd as the doctor's behavior turned at the request for his name, Frank merely shrugged it off. He had seen people act far sketchier. This stranger was no different from the disheveled outfit that typically accompanied him. He chopped it up to Doc, valuing his privacy as much as Frank appreciated his vices. The chilly beer guzzled down his throat with a bitterness that made him wince in antipathy. Never one to pass up free booze, he relished what flavor could be found in the poorly brewed concoction. Tilting the bottle, Frank ensured that every acrid drop entered his mouth. Keeping the creature in his sight, he noticed it had begun to change. The cracked skin on its bald head smoothed over, loosening the taut skin on its vile face. With each gulp down Frank's esophagus, the petite devil grew less foul to stare at, although it remained a horrendous sight. Flesh appeared where its lips should be curling a meaty pulp that covered the distorted expression of its unwelcoming smile. "Well, Doc, I appreciate the beverage." He brushed drops of beer that collected on the stubble around his lips. "I think my intrusion has lasted long enough, so if you could just point me to the—" Loud knocking interrupted Frank and Doc's attention. "Hold that thought," he motioned to the paper cup on the coffee table, "and be sure to take them. You'll feel better." After Doc departed to investigate the disturbance, Frank examined the paper cup's contents. Inside was a cocktail of differing colored pills, some small and others larger. At first it looked like nothing more than a homemade hangover remedy of vitamins and supplements to help ease the growing tension, building a tingling pressure in his head. Through his mind-splitting hangover, Frank swiftly attuned his attention to lay focus on one small, white, circular pill. As if straining an overextended gaze towards an old friend, one he both loved and loathed behind a mountain of muddled history, in the paper cup laid his favorite vice of all. Pinched between his thumb and pointer finger was one 10-milligram Ambien pill. Anyone else with acute knowledge of sedatives, this would be an immediate cause of alarm. Frank saw it as nothing less than the sweetest gift imaginable. He was no stranger to abusing medication, rather, he developed it into a hobby that had over many years grown into an unhealthy, dependent obsession. Instead of rationalizing his situation like a normal person, Frank's only concern was diving deeper into his indulgences. He did not know whose house this was, in what part of the county, at what time of day. This stranger was trying to slip him a drug meant to knock insomniacs out for hours under deceiving kindness. Little did he know, Frank was the worst kind of addict. A functioning one, with a tolerance to match. As Frank brought the pill to his lips, the impy shifted out from the protection of the curtain, slowly inching its way to the couch as its pulpy, mashed lips salivated. Unconcerned with the creature's approach, Frank's sole focus was the pill's numbing joy. Savoring the moment, he didn't swallow the pill whole. Rather, he placed it between his front teeth, steadily grinding it as the tip of his tongue sampled the delicate powder. It tasted far more bitter than the beer, but emerged fond memories, ones of a dull ecstasy that filled him with delight. Grinding away the pill, the dust mixed with spit created a slurry that coated all parts of Frank's mouth, gradually absorbing into his bloodstream. It was enough to slow his perception of time with a deep inhale that made him feel underwater. Of all the illicit substances he indulged in, Ambien was by far his favorite. Nothing carried the same smooth transition from a chaotic world to one so soothing, filled with dreary melancholy. This was a reality Frank felt most comfortable calling home. As the opiate took its effect, the imp crawled ever closer, all the while its grotesque appearance turned alluring. The upturned nose, revealing crusted, snot-coated nostrils, crooked down, matching a more human-like nose. It grew actual lips along with filed teeth that looked far less menacing than the jagged fangs. Both arms and legs thickened from their frail, skeletal condition, allowing the creature to stand up properly. What was once a horrid fiend with a painful disposition now resembled a small, handsome person retaining a polished, red skin. Whatever this beast had become, it was now beautiful. "What the fuck?" Frank muttered aloud, sinking back to the couch. "Quiet," the imp scolded, causing Frank's eyes to open wide in bewilderment. "Just enjoy this feeling before he returns. You think I was frightening? Wait until you see the butcher." Frank leaned forward, hands on his knees. "You can understand me? Fuck. You can talk? What the—" The handsome devil put his small hands to Frank's lips. "Get it together already. We can discuss this later over some decent tasting ale. Right now, our only concern is to leave here alive." Frank couldn't help but feel as though he was entering an unpleasant trip as the numbing sensation from the medicine spread. The abrupt footsteps from the hall indicated Doc was on his way back. He shoved the remaining pills from the cup between the couch cushions. One disaster at a time, Frank thought, trying to steady his composure. Doc picked up the empty beer bottle and paper cup from the coffee table. "You need another drink?" "Yeah, sure." "What was that noise?" Doc's expression went blank for a moment, then replied, ignoring Frank's question, "You know what? I'll have one too." Frank noticed a light red vapor tracing Doc's trail as he walked to the kitchen. A faint mist of crimson drifted around him as he readied 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of scotch. The haze settled around him like a tall maroon silhouette. The figure surrounding Doc matched all his motions from pouring the drinks to walking back to the living room. This ghostly apparition gradually had even the most minuscule details develop, allowing Frank to see its true form in a more accurate resolution. The foggy figure enveloping Doc was a muscular man wearing a pointed executioner's hood. Bold iron chains wrapped around his arms, twisted over his shoulders, then circled a scaly chest with skin like that of an alligator. The chains bound taut, enveloping his waist. Below the chains, it wore a stained apron that covered broad legs cloaked down to tattered ends, sweeping the floor. As Doc handed Frank a glass with an adequate amount of scotch, the shadowy spectre reached its arm, holding a dull, overworked cleaver. Frank received the glass with apprehension, afraid of the intentions the wicked entity had in store. Doc paced around the room, constantly sipping his drink. A subtle shift had occurred. Anxiety visibly marred the once cordial host. The imp struggled its way to the arm of the couch, leaning in close to Frank's ear. "Drink up, if you want to see more of him." Frank took the encouragement with a quickness, pounding down the scotch in a single gulp, then whispered in return, "Am I really seeing this? I understand these concepts are hard for mortals to comprehend. Trust me, just go with it, and stop talking." The imp slapped the back of Frank's head. "You're drawing unnecessary attention to yourself." "What are you doing?" Doc stopped pacing as he looked at Frank with confusion. "Are you feeling all right?" "Oh yeah," Frank made an okay sign with a hand. "Nice and peachy over here." "You're talking to yourself?" "Oh, that? I don't know. Guess I'm feeling a bit out of it. Could be the booze or whatever meds you gave me. Hell, maybe mix of the two." "That's right." The misty apparition flickered in and out of focus. "Probably shouldn't have given you alcohol. Don't make any sudden movements. Take a moment to relax and rest." Frank carefully stood up to not alarm Doc. "I think I'll be fine. Just let me know which way is quickest back into town, and I'll get out of your hair." Doc rushed over, placing his hands on Frank's shoulders, setting him back down on the couch. "No, I think you need to stay a little while longer, just until the meds wear off." Another loud banging came from the hallway, followed by the racketing of metal. Doc diverted his attention from Frank and hurried back to the source of the sounds. The opportune time to escape was now, as Frank moved towards the front door. To his horror, the door lacked an inside handle, only a lock. Leaving through the front door required the key. He had been so foolishly distracted by the free booze and drugs that he ignored all the obvious warning signs that Doc had some nefarious plans. From his experience, no one was ever so welcoming without an ulterior motive. "You know, telling him you were alone is where you messed up," the imp blurted out the obvious. Frank's fingers dug into his hair, his plea edged with desperation. "Are you just going to remind me how stupid I am, or are you going to help me?" A pompous smile grew on the imp's face. "Well, I told you he's a butcher. That should have said everything. Everyone knows those are nasty once they manifest." Frank grew sick of the little devil toying with him and darted over, rattling the tiny beast. "I have no idea what any of that means." He fumed through gritted teeth, drops of spit spraying on the imp. The creature gave a frown. "That's right. Barfazol didn't tell you anything, did he?" Frank dropped the creature, then frantically began scanning about for a means to get out of the house. He has a bad habit of rushing mortals through their contracts. Can't say I'm surprised. At the very least, he could have gone over the manifestation of mortal sins. And what is manifestation exactly? Frank hurried to the kitchen as the imp followed in tow. The creature pounced up to the counter between the refrigerator and sink, presenting himself upright with his arms stretched out. "Me, for example," he proudly pronounced. "You are what humans call a junkie. I am your sins, your compulsions and unsavory passions realized. That butcher, well, he's the horse doctor's sins. Judging by how clear you can see him, it looks like his soul is pretty far gone." Frank stopped searching through drawers and gave the imp a questioning look. "Why do you say that like it's a good thing? That guy is planning on killing me or forcing me to be a sex puppet." 10,000 souls, remember?" Frank began, connecting the dots. "The world won't miss a murderer. Why not start by giving Barfazol a soul already destined for dis?" Frank was a lot of things, but he wasn't a killer. The severity of the contract he hesitantly signed instantly became apparent. The price of his life, the value of his soul, was to literally send 10,000 souls to the pits of hell. The annoying little imp was Virgil to his Dante. Now wasn't the time to dread the details of his half-hearted promises to a demon. Escaping this house alive was all that mattered. Doc had been gone for a while, and it unnerved Frank. The ambient intensified, causing his perception of time to slow. Every breath felt heavy, his short-term memory muddled. It was a blissful sensation that placed Frank in an attuned focus. All it took was a small sedative to quiet his racing thoughts at the cost of his reaction time. A fair trade-off, so long as he planned his next few moves carefully. "Hey!" Frank shouted down the hallway. "I gotta piss! Just a heads up!" Hopefully, Doc's preoccupation would allow him enough time to devise some kind of escape plan. "Wait," Doc started, making his way back to Frank. "I'll show you where the restroom is." "Damn it!" Perhaps that was a dangerous move to make. When Doc entered the living room, Frank hid himself behind the wall dividing the kitchen and dining room. He held his breath to better listen to Doc's footsteps as they made steady, gradual strides from one room to the next. "Francis," Doc called out, hoping for Frank to reply, "Where are you?" As quietly as he could, Frank moved along the wall, turning the corner to the hallway. "You should lay down. The drug should be taking effect by now. Wouldn't want you to fall and hurt yourself." Frank noticed a slightly open door at the hall's end. That must have been where Doc had gone to silence whatever kept banging. With no time to lose, he entered the room, being cautious not to make unnecessary noise. In front of him was a dimly lit staircase. It was the entrance to a basement. Perhaps there was a way to escape down there. With few options, Frank felt adventuring down to the dark was better than nothing. As Frank descended into darkness, the ambient reached its peak. He could barely make out a flicker of red as the imp continued to tag along, running ahead of him to the base of the staircase. He could hear movement. Something rattled, as if struggling. Was Doc keeping a caged animal down here? Or was it merely an old washing machine? The creature referred to Doc's sins being manifested as a butcher, so chances are whatever he kept down here had to be sinister enough to remain in the dark. There was a strong smell of rust emanating from the basement. The strong smell of rust took Frank aback, causing him to cover his nose from the scent of rotting iron. Following the waft of oxidizing metal came a profound odor of indescribable origin, urging his gag reflex. Whatever was down here made Frank sick. No matter where he looked, the basement was completely closed off from the outside. No windows or hidden doors emitting thin cracks of sunlight. He walked right into an inescapable corner, trapping himself in the perfect place for Doc's malicious intentions to be realized. An overdose would have been favorable than being violently killed in a dark, damp, rusty hole. The ambient helped keep Frank calm, but his imagination had a way of proliferating nonetheless. Stumbling about the basement, Frank kept his soles firm to the ground, making his way one stuttering shuffle at a time. Acting as though newly blind, he waved his arms around with each falter forward. As luck would have it, a small glass struck his forehead. Frank stumbled directly into a light bulb. Still warm to the touch, he traced the light from its base up the cord, searching for a means to illuminate it, ending his lurching in the dark. A tremble of nerves shook his fingers when he found a thin, beaded chain. With a sigh of relief, Frank clasped the chain, his palm damp with sweat. A rattling came from the dark as he readied to pull the chain. There was something lurking in the dark. Taking in a deep breath with a strain, pulling the muscles of his calves, Frank pulled hard on the chain, prepared to flee the basement if necessary. The warm glow of an incandescent bulb painted light all around the room, revealing a horror beyond Frank's wildest imagination. Along the basement walls were wire cages holding other people, their limbs bound, mouths gagged, with cloth covering their eyes. In total, there were 8 cages, 6 of which held captive prisoners, 2 that were naked, covered in bruises, with the rest wearing blood-stained, tattered clothes. Judging from their emaciated, thin frames, they must have been down here a while. The sight was enough to make Frank start dry heaving as the sickness made his skin crawl. "Tell me what I'm seeing isn't real." Frank looked down at the imp, eyes wide with aversion. Completely unbothered by the sight, the imp scratched the base of one of his horns. "If you find this upsetting, then you should be happy you signed the contract. This is child's play compared to what they do back home." The liquor started taking a mild effect, bubbling in Frank's gut. He spun around the room to get a better lay of the land. Blood stained all about the room, with some puddles fresher than others. That explained the pungent scent of rusted iron. The only way out of the room was the same way he came in, making him just as much of a captive as the others locked in their cages. Across from the stairs base was a metal table, a sink, and what seemed to be a meat grinder. His stomach had enough of the foul scene, heaving what little alcohol it had yet to absorb out Frank's mouth, sending him to his knees. The table displayed the massacred remains of the unfortunate soul chosen for brutal butchery. Limbs were cleanly severed, torso ripped and hollowed out. Frank averted his gaze long before noticing the head was nowhere to be found. A bleak end for one unlucky soul to find the malevolent graces of Doc. "What the fuck?" Frank spit drips of vomit to the blood-stained tile. "Could be worse. That could be you on the table." "We have to get out of here," legs trembling. Frank struggled to stand upright, "before that sicko does the same to us." "We?" The imp was gleeful at the mention of the two of them being in the grisly situation together. "I'll have you know it makes me thrilled that you see us as a team." Frank shrugged. "Something tells me you're not going away anytime soon." In search of self-defense against Doc, Frank paid no attention to the struggling people in the cages. As horrible as their containment might be, Frank was still free and paid no thought to notions of their rescue. All that mattered was him getting out of the house alive. He couldn't waste valuable time trying to free people that were too frail to move with haste. Stuck in one of the severed legs on the table was a meat hook. It was better than nothing to defend himself with, if the need arose. With a quick, reluctant tug, he ripped the hook out of the leg with a gushing sound that resulted in yet another dry heave, stiffening his abs. Meat hook in hand, he shared a nod with the imp, who climbed up to rest, clung to his shoulder, its tiny, pointed fingertips poking through his shirt. One slow step at a time, the wary duo made their way back up to the main house. Frank kept his eyes fixed on the sunlight creeping from the door he left ajar, the meat hook held high with a steady grasp on the handle. Ambien steadied his nerves but made him sluggish, like climbing steps under water. It granted an intoxicating euphoria that would drift anyone not resilient in the effects to a sweet, serene slumber. His years spent dosing himself to that calming resonance allowed Frank to march through the sedation with a heightened awareness, avoiding the pill's siren song. As Frank crept toward the basement door, he strained his ear toward the open slit, listening for approaching footsteps. Fear restrained him, yet Frank's patience waned faster than his illicit drug tolerance. The moment's deliberation was brief. Just as when he signed the contract, there was no time for a mental debate. Urgency demanded action. Fight or flight be damned. Either option was better than standing still as he braced for an inevitable catastrophe. Frank preferred the chaotic randomness of uncertainty over predetermined outcomes. If he was damned either way, he would rather remain unaware of the details. Doc's voice boomed down the hall, accompanied by the creaking of uneven floorboards. "Francis," he said, "you shouldn't wander unfamiliar places in your condition." Each word deepened in tone, as if an audible filter lay just above his normal speech. A gracious host wouldn't want his guest to become lost, nor turned to a trespasser. As Doc's silhouette aligned with the door, it eclipsed the sliver of daylight filtering through the crack. The butcher's ghastly apparition enveloped Doc's human shape, erasing his presence as if summoned from oblivion and materializing in his place. Faint trails of scarlet smoke billowed into the basement as the butcher placed a hand to the door. Frank's grip on the meat hook tightened, his knuckles whitening. He could feel the butcher's presence, an oppressive force that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. "Come out, Francis." The butcher's voice a sinister growl, a deep and ominous vibration that seemed to resonate with the very walls of the basement. "It's time to face the consequences of your curiosity." A gleam of chrome swiftly met the butcher's threat, slicing through the air as the door creaked. The tip of Frank's hook landed deep into the butcher's forearm, becoming lodged between bone and the chain links. He erupted a visceral release of fury, the agony of the strike awakening unmitigated rage. Pouring forth from the wound seeped a viscous maroon sludge. The surprise of Frank's sudden display of valor gave him a brief window of opportunity to escape the claustrophobic space and venture into the hallway proper, unfortunately leaving the hook behind. In a frantic scramble, Frank lurched through the house, his mind clouded by a mix of alcohol and medication, while the imp clung tightly to his shoulder. The intoxicating blend had hit a crescendo, leaving Frank's movements clumsy and uncoordinated. His only thought was self-defense. He desperately needed to find a weapon or something that could serve as one. The unfamiliar house seemed even more labyrinthine, his thoughts confused and his vision hypersensitive. The once gentle daylight now blared with a vivid brightness. Frank bought just enough time to return to the living room before the butcher resumed his relentless chase. Despite his injury, the beast confronted Frank with a guttural roar, his words devolving into incoherent, almost bestial sounds. In search of defense, Frank's eyes landed on an assortment of fireplace tools. A poker appeared ideal to establish some distance. The challenge was to reach it before the butcher closed in. Frank had barely taken 3 steps when a scaly hand gripped his jacket, yanked him to the floor, and flung the imp from its perch. His head hit the ground with a thud, further clouding his already muddled mind. The butcher pinned Frank's shoulder with his wounded arm, while the other brandished a rusted cleaver prepared to strike. "Grab and roll!" the imp yelled, pointing a claw at the meat hook swaying above Frank's head. Without a second's delay, Frank grasped the hook's wooden handle and twisted away from the cleaver's descent. The motion tore a piece of flesh from the butcher's arm, eliciting a howl of torment. Rolling away from the demonic figure, Frank took deep, ragged breaths and regained his footing. The imp hurried back to the safety of Frank's side. The butcher clutched his bleeding wound, kneeling to stem the flow. Frank stood over him, hook in hand, poised to deliver a decisive, lethal strike. Time stretched indefinitely, whether from the sedative effects of the Ambien or the weight of the impending act. It felt like an eternity compressed into a single second. The adversaries locked eyes in mutual recognition. "Be consumed by thine own wrath," thundered the butcher. Upon hearing those last words, Frank swung the hook in a wide arc, its tip burying deep into the butcher's skull. As Frank swiftly delivered the strike, the butcher collapsed lifeless to the ground. The fog of medication that had enveloped Frank lifted, replaced by adrenaline's ebb and sheer exhaustion. His legs turned to jelly, unable to support even his slight frame. At the moment of his first kill, the scar on his palm throbbed with familiar pain. He crumpled to the floor, watching the 7-pointed star morph into a Roman numeral 1. A chilling pain shot up his arm, finding its bitter end in Frank's heart. As his vision dimmed and his consciousness succumbed to the pain, a loud bang echoed. Frank weakly lifted his head to see 2 blurred figures enter the front door, guns at the ready. Speechless and bewildered by the recent events, Frank's eyes shut as he slipped into an unintended yet welcomed slumber. Groggy and disoriented, Frank's eyes fluttered open, waking to a world too bright, too loud. His head pulsed with a relentless pressure, blurring his vision as he struggled to find clarity. With careful movements, Frank shifted into a sitting posture, intent on not aggravating his throbbing headache. A lifetime of substance abuse had fortified his tolerance, yet he grappled with the consequences no better than the rest. The bright overhead lights only made his hangover that much worse. "You're awake," said the imp, his tone harsh and scratchy. As Frank rubbed his eye, he noticed the creature in the room, although much less pleasing to look at than the last time he saw him. Gone was the polished red skin and human-like features. In their stead returned the hideous boils and scars, as a vile mix of saliva and snot dripped from its face. Its body twitched. With each grueling tremor, a part of its body reverted to its natural demonic state. The imp tried to speak with Frank, but the disorientation of waking in a jail cell distracted him. He carefully massaged his hand, running his thumb over the scar, cool to the touch, but otherwise painless. It didn't take long for him to understand his current predicament, piecing together what little he could remember through the amnesia qualities of the Ambien. Beyond the intense pain of the transforming scar, all that followed was a bewildering fog. "Listen!" hissed the imp. "I promise you. Ek hag." The creature's utterances twisted into a jarring screech that pained Frank's ears. "Quiet, please. Listening to you is like nails on a chalkboard." "You eraka, era, hagana." The little devil moved closer to Frank, who had covered both his ears to push back the horrid sound. "Afraid not. Era hag, era hag." "Shut up, shut up, shut up!" Frank shouted as the screeching penetrated deep into his skull. The imp frowned as it cowered to a corner. As Frank steadied himself with deep, controlled breaths, he heard a jingle of keys approaching his cell. "Talking to yourself again, are we?" a stocky police officer said from the other side of the bars. "Are we going to play nice, or do you need more time in the drunk tank?" "One word, jackass lawyer." Frank rubbed his temples, hoping to relieve the growing pressure in his head. "Hardball, it is then." The officer turned to leave. Frank rushed to the cell door, gripping the bars tight. "I want my phone call." He then proceeded hunched down, vomiting near his own shoes. "For what?" "I've got rights, you hillbilly fuck. Give me my phone call. I want to speak to a lawyer." Unbothered by Frank's insults, the officer shook his head. "Tell you what, I'll do you one better. Just hang tight." Frank continued his loud demands until the clanking of keys faded into another room. He slumped to the floor, careful not to get too close to his watery puke. So many thoughts raced in his mind. The most disastrous one was that someone had locked him away for Doc's murder. What could he possibly say in his defense? That he made a deal with the devil and now he saw demonic entities? If it kept him out of prison, it would only lead to an indefinite stay in a psychiatric ward. His current position was rather bleak. The officer returned with a well-dressed older gentleman. "Present your hands, please." He dangled a pair of cuffs. "We'll get you to the interview room and explain everything to you." Pleased with the rapid appearance of who he assumed was his legal representation, Frank complied with the order, sliding his wrist through a small opening in the bars, allowing the cuffs to bind his hands together. The imp, invisible to the others, scurried along in tow. To Frank's surprise, they led him to an office, not a typical empty room with nothing more than a table and a couple of chairs. "Isn't this the part where you fuck off?" Frank said smugly, then turned to his would-be lawyer. "They didn't even read my Miranda rights." The officer gave a heavy sigh, and he uncuffed Frank's hands. "You're not under arrest, so there's no need." Confused, Frank sank into his chair. "Well then, what the hell is going on?" "I'm Officer Harden, and this is Judge Mathis, local magistrate." Harden took a moment to find the words. "Looks like it's your lucky day. We are arranging transport to get you back home to New Orleans, but before we let you leave this building, we need to ensure we are on the same page." Shocked was putting it lightly as Frank's jaw dropped. I don't know what to say." "Trust me when I say this." Mathis leaned in close. "We believe people like you deserve to rot." He straightened himself and paced about the room behind Frank. "But with this case, it's best we keep certain elements quiet. Your involvement, specifically. Currently, the charges against you are driving under the influence, reckless endangerment with a vehicle, driving on an expired license, grand theft of a 1984 Buick Sabre, breaking and entering, trespassing, and the big one, murder. Care to explain any of that?" His headache increasing, Frank muttered, "It's my brother's car. I borrowed it." "I'm assuming to pick up the fermentation equipment in the trunk?" "We own a bar and have been looking to brewing our own beer. We aren't moonshiners, if that's what you're getting at." Harden leaned back in his chair as he played with a pen. "So, how did you happen into Dr. Gladwell's home?" "I thought this wasn't an interrogation." "This is us getting our stories straight." Mathis gave a harsh whisper. "Lord, The carnage in that house, it's unfathomable. The stinging in Frank's head became unbearable. Any chance I could ask for a smoke? Harden delved into his pockets, producing a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, offering them to Frank. Upon the sensation of the smoke hitting his lungs, the imp brushed its gnarled horns against Frank's leg. Peering down to the creature, he noticed his image flickered between a sorrowful beast and the pleasant red devil he met back at Doc's house. Tiny doses of nicotine satiated his immense hunger for harder drugs. Though it didn't cure the hangover, it carried him through the moment. "If it had been anyone else, we wouldn't be having this conversation," Harden said, staring directly into Frank's eyes as he leaned forward on the desk, his hands cupped together. "We found your car abandoned with the door wide open on the side of the road. We called it in and had it towed. Since Dr. Gladwell's home was close, we wanted to ask if he had witnessed anything. Upon reaching the porch, we witnessed you falling to the ground. We busted down the front door just to catch you red-handed, literally. At first it was an open and shut case, but it wasn't too long after that we discovered the basement. That's when you realized it was self-defense? More or less. Okay." Frank danced between irritation and confusion. "If that's the case, then what exactly are we doing now?" Mathis was quick to chime in before Harden could make his case. "Everything attached to that house is a horrific tragedy. God knows what Gladwell had in store for you. Best assume it was a short life left in a cage before being butchered like an animal. But even grim things like this have golden opportunities tied to them. As uncomfortable as it is to admit, we aim to capitalize off the situation." Finding a pause in Mathis's spiel, Harden jumped in. "Turns out Gladwell has been kidnapping hitchhikers and other undesirables like yourself. It's still in the infancy of the investigation, but a man many of us felt was a pillar of our small community is in fact a serial killer. Now, we could do this by the letter of the law, which will most likely result in your future release from custody once the finer details are out. Or we could proceed as if you were never here, saving all of us time and paperwork." Inhaling deeply, Frank contemplated the situation through the haze of smoke, trying to discern their true intentions behind such unexpected mercy. The imp started making more noise, scratchy squeals with the occasional intelligible word or two. Frank tried his best to ignore the persistent thorn in his side. "This isn't about letting me go," Frank drew his conclusion. "You want to take responsibility for stopping a mass murderer." "Well, there we have it." Mathis patted Frank's shoulder. "Only a matter of time before you connected the dots. All we ask is that you forget you were ever here, and we will take care of the rest." Harden expressed irritation, directed to both Frank and Mathis. "As on board with this as I may be, we shouldn't forget the survivors." "Shit, that's right. I was down there with them. They will know I was there." "Drugged and blindfolded in shit-covered cages," Mathis chuckled. "I doubt they will say anything contrary to our reports." A bang came from Harden's fist, pounding the desk. "4 survivors, 3 bodies, one of which we are still trying to find all the remains of. That should be our saving grace, not some chance to profit off their misfortune." He pointed a stern finger at Frank. "If it wasn't for your crimes, all of them would be dead. That's what you should be thankful for." Frank was shocked. There were 6 people down there. Did 2 of them really die? Taking a deep breath, Harden responded with a measured nod. The weight of the situation settled upon him. Frank felt a sense of gratitude that there were any survivors, yet this was overshadowed by the grim reality he faced upon awakening in a jail cell after murdering someone. "Why?" Harden and Mathis paid close attention to Frank. "Why do any of this and let me go? I just don't get it." Mathis put a hand to his potbelly. And you don't have to. That's the magic of it. But if it helps you sleep at night, it's an election year. An event like this, controlled by the right people, can sway many votes. A career-defining case for all parties involved, excluding the likes of you, of course. You saved a few poor souls and sent another bastard to hell. You should feel good about that. Frank looked to Harden, who seemed the more humane between the two. Think of this as a mercy, a fair trade for your infractions. The imp leaped onto the desk, bestowing upon Frank a disconcerting grin through its contorted lips. As the last wisps of smoke from his cigarette dissipated, the creature erratically shifted between forms. Frank's gaze followed its deformed head as it turned towards Mathis. The nicotine's rush receding, he glimpsed a sinister, vulture-like bird settled on the judge's shoulder, its serpentine eyes glaring and beak jaggedly broken. The vision faded quickly from sight, yet its imprint lingered in Frank's memory, indelible and haunting. Well, it's safe to say you'll never hear from me again, so long as you hold true to your word. Just give me my keys, and I'll be out of your hair. The two paused before laughing at Frank. If you were paying any attention, then you'd recall we impounded and have reported it as a stolen recovery. We can't just erase something that has already been documented like that. Besides, you are in no condition to drive, be it medically nor legally. But rest assured, we'll get you home. What do I tell my brother about the car? That seems to be a you problem. He'll be able to get it back provided he pays the impound fines when he arranges pickup. Harden shut Frank down at the first sign of protest. This is the price of your freedom. Accept it. With bus ticket in hand, Frank waited at the station, his hangover finally calming down. His phone was still in the car, so he was unable to contact his brother. Rather, he would have to explain himself face-to-face upon his return to the bar in New Orleans. Thankfully, Harden humored Frank's vices and gifted him a small bottle of whiskey for the trip. He paced himself with small sips to make the bottle last, but it wasn't to fuel a sense of alcoholism. Rather, he wanted to communicate with the imp. So where do we go from here? One disaster at a time, I suppose, the imp's feet swaying off the bench. Sounds good to me. A sweet sting of alcohol coated Frank's mouth. Reckon I should at least know your name. We're in this together after all. Oh, well, as thoughtful as the sentiment is, you lack the biological means to even attempt to utter my name. Ha! A laugh belted with the scent of intoxication. Try me. The imp let out an unholy scream, a verbal jumble of letters weaponized for an audible assault. Jesus! Frank's ears were ringing. Yeah, that's not going to happen. I think I heard you say Sam in some part of that. No, I didn't. Well, that's what I heard. From now on, you're Sam. I'll take that over some things you were thinking to call me. Speaking of which, stop talking, you buffoon. You look like a crazy person. Then how the hell are we supposed to talk? How do you think? Sam raised an eyebrow, followed by a wink. Oh. Like this? Frank thought. That's right, Sam said aloud, confident no one other than Frank could hear him. The bus ride offered Frank sufficient time to unwind before facing his brother. Ample time to formulate a self-deprecating excuse that would save him from a lengthy interrogation. Despite his aversion to lectures, Frank conceded that, given his current predicament, it was a small price to pay. Once that was complete, he could redirect his attention to Barfazol's deal. One down, 9,999 to go.
Thank you for listening to Demon in a Bottle by Mace Valor. Ever since I started uploading my stories here, this community has given me a massive amount of inspiration and motivation to continue doing what I love. It means the world to me that people out there care about what I write, so thank you. From the deepest pits of my dark soul, you have all given me back the best pieces of myself. And special appreciation for the creation of this video goes to Foibles, 1 Hour Photo, The Infraggable Crunk, Bradley, Rust Ruined My Life, and Lady Ash.